Imagine building a life in front of thousands of followers, every smile, every dance, every moment shared with the world. Then, almost overnight, the posts stop. Friends begin asking questions. Family members grow desperate. And deep in a wooded area outside Atlanta, investigators make a discovery that transforms a missing persons search into one of Georgia's most disturbing homicide cases. A young influencer known for spreading joy is found near her burning vehicle, and the horrifying evidence suggests someone wanted every trace of the truth erased. But killers often leave behind the one clue they never expect. In this case, an ordinary piece of paper lying near the scene would become the thread detectives pulled until the entire story began to unravel. How did a vibrant 22-year-old's life end in such unimaginable violence? And what evidence ultimately led investigators to the man prosecutors said was responsible? Stay with us as we examine the timeline, the investigation, and the courtroom battle behind the murder of Beauty Couch.
They hurt my baby so bad. My baby didn't deserve this. My baby was a good baby. She was a sweet girl. She never bothered nobody. She was a friend to everybody.
My sister was found in these woods like an animal. She did nothing to anybody for anyone to want to do her like this.
Here, we deliver clear, factual, and up-to-date, true crime stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed on the latest cases and investigations. Beauty Couch was from Austell, Georgia, a city in Cobb County on the western edge of the Atlanta metro area. She built an online following through short-form videos of herself roller skating and dancing, content that showcased both athletic skill and personality. By the time of her death, her Instagram account, run under the name Beauty Katera, had surpassed 150,000 followers. She described herself in her profile as a dancer, and in the weeks before her death, she had been promoting her first dance class, a milestone in what appeared to be a growing career built around movement and performance. She lived with or near her mother, Deanna Thurman, and regularly drove a Dodge Dart registered in her mother's name. Beauty had an aunt, Christy Thurman, and a sister, Layla Brown, both of whom would later speak publicly about her. Family members described her as warm and universally liked. A friend and skating teammate, Ailey Shepard, would later tell a courtroom that Beauty was a light in the lives of the people around her. In April 2023, Beauty began a relationship with a man named Eugene Toby Louis Jacques. According to prosecutors, the two had met at a beauty industry conference in Orlando, Florida. Shortly after they connected, Louis Jacques relocated from out of state to Georgia to be near her. The relationship was new, and according to Beauty's sister, it struck her as somewhat unusual, and she described a bad feeling about him. Beauty's mother later echoed that impression, describing a similarly negative gut reaction to the man her daughter was dating. Beauty Couch was last seen on August 22nd, 2023. As the day went on, her mother, Deanna Thurman, found she was unable to reach her. Calls and messages went unanswered. Thurman also tried contacting Beauty's boyfriend, Eugene Louis Jacques, hoping he might know where she was. He too did not respond. For a mother whose daughter was normally reachable, the silence stretched into a source of real concern, though at that point there was no indication of what had actually happened. Prosecutors would later argue that this was the day Beauty was killed. According to the state's timeline, presented during the 2026 trial, Louis Jacques stabbed Beauty 81 times, then transported her body to a wooded area near Joe Jerkins Boulevard and Landers Street in Austell. He allegedly placed her body in the wood line and covered it with tree branches and other debris in an apparent attempt to conceal it. Rather than leaving the area for good, prosecutors said he returned to the scene multiple times over the following hours, a detail that would later become one of the more unusual elements of the state's case. On the morning of August 23, 2023, the Austell Fire Department was dispatched to a reported brush fire near Joe Jerkins Boulevard and Landers Street. Firefighters arriving at the scene found something more than vegetation burning, a Dodge Dart fully engulfed in flames. At that point, there was no known connection between the fire and a missing person, and no indication that a body was nearby. The blaze was extinguished, and the car was towed to a wrecker yard as part of standard procedure. The connection came shortly afterward. Officers with the Austell Police Department traced the registration on the burned Dodge Dart to Deanna Thurman. When they went to her address, they learned that her daughter, Beauty, the person who normally drove that car, had not been seen or heard from since the previous day. That detail changed everything. Investigators returned to the scene of the vehicle fire and began searching the surrounding wood line. Less than 200 feet from where the car had burned, they located a body matching Beauty's description. She had been placed in the trees and covered with branches and debris in what appeared to be a deliberate attempt at concealment. The Cobb County Medical Examiner's Office would later document 81 separate stab wounds on her body. Her remains had also been burned. Within a short time, Cobb County Police publicly confirmed that foul play was involved in her death. Investigators processing the scene near Beauty's body found something that would end up being central to the entire case: a torn traffic citation lying in the dirt, just feet from where her body had been found. The ticket bore the name Eugene Toby Louis Jacques and included the license plate number for his vehicle, a white Nissan Altima. The prosecution's theory was that the citation had fallen out of Louis Jacques' pocket or was otherwise dropped accidentally while he was moving Beauty's body into the wood line. It was a small, almost incidental piece of paper, but it directly tied a specific person and a specific vehicle to the location where a homicide victim had just been found. Using the license plate number on the ticket, investigators began tracking Louis Jacques' vehicle. Law enforcement agencies in Georgia use a network of automated license plate reader cameras, commonly referred to during the trial by the brand name Flock, that photograph and log passing vehicles. Cross-referencing this technology with phone location records, investigators were able to reconstruct Louis Jacques' movements in the hours after Beauty's death. According to testimony presented by the prosecution, phone records for Louis Jacques placed him in the same areas where his car was independently captured on multiple license plate reader cameras near the crime scene. This corroboration, cell phone location data lining up with vehicle camera captures, became one of the pillars of the state's circumstantial case. Prosecutors alleged that Louis Jacques did not leave the area after the killing. Instead, they said he returned to the wooded area near Joe Jerkins Boulevard and Landers Street 5 separate times over the course of roughly a day. The state's theory was that these repeated trips represented him checking whether Beauty's body had been discovered yet. In between these documented trips back to the scene, investigators say Louis-Jacques was captured on camera at a nearby gas station, where he was seen disposing of unidentified items into multiple different trash cans, a detail prosecutors pointed to as consistent with someone trying to dispose of evidence in a way that would not be found in one single location. It was during the fourth of these 5 trips, according to the state, that Louis-Jacques set fire to both Beauty's body and the Dodge Dart. That fire is what drew the Austell Fire Department to the scene in the first place. Prosecutors say Louis-Jacques then came back a 5th time, only to find that law enforcement was already present. At that point, according to the state's narrative, he left Georgia entirely and fled toward Louisiana. After leaving Georgia, prosecutors say Louis-Jacques did not simply run, he took active steps to change his identity. Once in Louisiana, he began using the name Michael Waters, sometimes spelled Michael Waters, in reporting on the case. Under this alias, prosecutors say he purchased a new phone through Boost Mobile and completed a job application at a golf course in the state. 2 days after Beauty's body was discovered, on September 15, 2023, detectives with the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office Proactive Enforcement Unit located and arrested Louis-Jacques in the Slidell, Louisiana area. Body camera footage from the arrest, later played for the jury during the 2026 trial, reportedly captured him being asked by deputies why he had been using a fake name. According to that footage, he responded that he was trying to avoid getting caught. A search of his vehicle at the time of arrest turned up additional physical evidence tying him to the false identity: a Boost Mobile receipt and a completed job application, both under the name Michael Waters. St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office. Detective Katie Garby also testified that investigators recovered a burned piece of paper from inside the car, along with a pair of bloody tennis shoes. Forensic testing on the blood found on those shoes determined that it belonged to Louis-Jacques himself, not to Beauty. Investigators were not able to explain during the trial how or why his own blood ended up on the shoes. Louis-Jacques was extradited back to Georgia and booked into the Cobb County Jail on September 15, 2023. The following month, in October 2023, a Cobb County grand jury indicted him on 6 felony counts: malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, second-degree arson, concealing the death of another, and tampering with evidence. Nearly 3 years passed between Louis-Jacques' arrest in September 2023 and the start of his trial in May 2026. During that time, the case remained a point of interest for followers of Beauty's social media presence and for true crime audiences generally, though the day-to-day court proceedings drew less public attention until the trial itself began. The trial opened in Cobb Superior Court on Tuesday, May 19, 2026, before Judge Kimberly Childs. Prosecutor Stephanie Green delivered the state's opening statement, laying out for the jury how Louis-Jacques and Beauty had met at the Beauty Conference in Orlando, how he had relocated to be near her, and how their relationship had begun in April 2023, only months before her death. Green also used her opening to get ahead of what she knew would be a central defense argument: the absence of forensic evidence directly linking Louis-Jacques to the killing. she conceded up front that his DNA was not found on Beauty's body, and that her blood was not found on his clothing or inside his car. That concession set up the core tension of the entire trial. The Dodge Dart used in the crime had been burned so thoroughly that almost no forensic evidence survived inside it, with one notable exception: the torn traffic citation found near Beauty's body, which had somehow avoided the fire entirely. Over the course of the trial, prosecutors built their case primarily through circumstantial evidence, physical evidence recovered at 2 different crime scenes, and behavioral evidence drawn from Louis Jacques' actions after Beauty's death. On Thursday, May 21st, a Cobb County Police Department investigator testified about the discovery of the traffic citation, describing it as having been found mere feet from where Beauty's body was located, and confirming that it carried both Louis Jacques' name and his vehicle's license plate number. That same day, the jury was shown previously unseen body camera footage from the Louisiana arrest, including the moment deputies questioned Louis Jacques about his use of a false name. Detective Katie Garby of the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office testified regarding the items recovered from Louis Jacques' vehicle at the time of his arrest: the burned piece of paper, the bloody tennis shoes, and documentation connected to the alias Michael Waters. A separate investigator testified about the forensic testing performed on the blood found on the shoes, confirming that it matched Louis Jacques rather than Beauty. Prosecutors also walked the jury through the digital and surveillance evidence, phone location data, and license plate reader captures that they said placed Louis Jacques' vehicle at the crime scene on 5 separate occasions in the period between Beauty's death and the fire being set. Louis Jacques pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges. His attorney, Brian Lumpkin, built the defense around the absence of direct forensic evidence connecting his client to the actual killing. Lumpkin repeatedly emphasized that no DNA belonging to Louis Jacques was found on Beauty's body, and that none of her blood was ever found on his clothing or in his vehicle. Lumpkin argued to the jury that Louis Jacques' presence in the general area of Austell was not, by itself, evidence of guilt. He pointed out that Louis Jacques was Beauty's boyfriend and had legitimate reasons to be in the area regularly, since he visited her often. In his framing, the state's case relied heavily on the assumption that proximity and circumstantial timing amounted to proof, when, in his view, it did not rise to the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense also directly challenged the traffic citation, the single most damaging physical clue in the entire case. Lumpkin argued to the jury that it was implausible for that piece of paper to have survived a fire so intense that it destroyed nearly every other trace of forensic evidence inside the vehicle. He suggested it did not make logical sense that a fire capable of erasing blood evidence and DNA would somehow leave a paper citation completely intact just feet away. He framed the survival of that single document as too convenient and too strange to be taken as straightforward proof, though he stopped short of offering an alternative explanation for how it came to be at the scene. In his closing argument, Lumpkin acknowledged the brutality of the crime itself, while maintaining that brutality alone did not establish who committed it. He told the jury that although the evidence was, in his own words, consistent with his client's guilt, consistency was not the same as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In closing, prosecutor Stephanie Green, in some reporting also referred to as Stephanie Green, argued that Louis-Jacques' behavior after Beauty's death was itself powerful evidence of guilt. She pointed to his 5 return trips to the crime scene as evidence of someone monitoring whether a body had been discovered. She highlighted his flight from Georgia to Louisiana, his adoption of a false identity, his use of that alias to obtain a new phone and apply for work, and his own admission to deputies that he was trying to avoid getting caught. Green told the jury there was no innocent explanation that accounted for all of these behaviors together, and that his decision to flee the state was itself compelling evidence of guilt. The jury began deliberating on Friday, May 22, 2026, after both sides rested and delivered closing arguments. Judge Childs sent the jury to deliberate at approximately 4:06 p.m. Jurors returned with a verdict roughly 2 hours later. Louis-Jacques was found guilty on all 6 counts: malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, second-degree arson, concealing the death of another, and tampering with evidence. Courtroom reporting described him as sitting emotionless beside his attorney as the verdict was read, dressed in a dark grey suit with a black and blue tie and thick-rimmed glasses. Sentencing followed immediately after the verdict. Prosecutor Jared Horowitz addressed the court and urged Judge Childs to impose the maximum possible sentence, arguing that Louis-Jacques had shown no mercy toward Beauty and that the court should extend none in return. The court also heard victim impact statements from Beauty's family and friends. Her mother, Kimberly Couch, described her ongoing disbelief and anguish, questioning why the crime had happened at all. Her aunt, Christy Thurman, described the years-long investigation and trial process as extremely difficult for the family. Her friend and skating teammate, Ale Shepard, spoke about the impact Beauty had on the people around her. Judge Kimberly Childs sentenced Louis-Jacques to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years, the maximum sentence available under the charges. The sentence was handed down immediately following the jury's verdict. The case drew sustained public attention for 2 connected reasons: Beauty Couch's substantial online following and the extreme nature of the crime itself. It also stands as a notable example of how modern investigative tools, license plate reader networks, cell phone location data, and digital purchase records tied to a false identity can be used to reconstruct a suspect's movements even in the absence of direct forensic evidence like DNA or blood. The single piece of paper found near Beauty's body remained, throughout the trial, both the prosecution's strongest physical evidence and the defense's primary point of doubt. A small detail that ultimately anchored a nearly 3-year path from a burning car in the woods to a conviction on all counts. Did you find this case informative? If you want more true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.